Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Colony Drop, a Gundam podcast, where we talk about anything and everything related to the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise. My name is Brian, my co-pilot is Isaac, and today's episode picks up right where we left off last week, discussing Gundam video games that may interest you, including Isaac's favorite, the series known as Giren's Greed. So let's get back to it.
What's next on your list, Brian?
One game that people really seem to enjoy is another one from the Versus series called Gundam vs. Zeta Gundam. So this came out in 2005 for the PS2. It has really low ratings. I think IGN gave it something like a 3-something out of 10, which is super low. That seems pretty harsh to me, given how many people really enjoy this game. Similar to your AGE game, in this game you kind of just play through the 1-year war, as well as the Grips conflict with some I think there's some alternate scenarios that you can unlock, like, people die or don't die, that kind of thing. But I just thought that's a pretty cool game because if you want to play through some storylines for Gundam, this covers both the 1-year war and the Grips conflict, which is a lot to cover in one video game. That's a lot of characters, a lot of mobile suits, but apparently it's all in there for the PS2 2005, so go check it out if that sounds appealing. One cool thing about this is it has alternate colors for the suits. So you can put all your Zeon suits in Federation colors and vice versa. And the same thing for the AUG and the Titans. And it also applies to mobile armors, I think. Gives you a lot of inspiration for models, if you're into painting.
That sounds pretty cool, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of neat, I thought. The funniest thing I read about this game was that, so for those of us who have watched some of the old Gundam dub shows, you may remember that 0079 and Char's Counterattack were dubbed by one studio, but Zeta Gundam was dubbed by a different studio. So there were different voice actors playing the same characters. So this game, being Gundam vs. Zeta Gundam, it includes characters that went to both shows, Amuro, Char, Hayato, those kind of players. This game, I'm sure they just use the stock voices. So as a result, they use both sets of English voice actors for the same characters, and they switch off. So sometimes Amuro will sound one way, and then maybe a few seconds later, he might sound a little different because a different voice actor is voicing him at both times.
That must be really jarring. That's
Probably.
Right there with animation changes, right?
Yes. But it goes back to the whole, you need to sell it and you need to use what you have. So you dip into the master data of these are our voice lines that we have recorded. So those are the ones we're going to use. And I'm sure the executives don't really give two craps that two different voice actors voice the same character. And they're definitely not going to pay for one of them to come back and voice the missing lines. So that's what they got, apparently. So I would love to go find some clips of the switching, because that's kind of funny.
This is the voice acting equivalent of you're driving and you see a McDonald's and your mom's like, no, we have food at home. We have pre-recordings at home.
I'll make you a hamburger at home, son.
Yeah, it's don't worry, we have food at home. We're like, it's not the same.
Yeah. So that was a big favorite for a lot of people, Gundam versus Zeta Gundam, as well as Federation versus Zeon, which we already talked about from 2002. So again, the Versus series really holding up. Another one people really enjoyed was called the Gundam Breaker series. The Gundam Breaker series started in 2013. I think the one that people like the most is Gundam Breaker 3 for the PS4. Came out in 2016. And it's basically like a Gunpla hack and slash battle game, kind of like it's basically like Dynasty Warriors, if you've ever played any of those games. But it's based on Gunpla. So the story is, I think it's always like an original story. So you get to build and customize your own Gunpla and then fight it, in Dynasty Warriors style hack and slash. And you can customize your Gundam, all the parts, you can paint it different colors, that kind of thing. So it's very fast paced. Again, if you like Dynasty Warriors and you like Gunpla, you like customization, the Breaker series seems to be where it's at. I think there's a newer Gundam Breaker game called New Gundam Breaker, but it doesn't sound like people like that one quite as much as Gundam Breaker 3. So if you have a PS4, I would probably check out Gundam Breaker 3 if Gunpla customization sounds cool to you. That actually sounds pretty fun to me. I don't know. What do you think, Isaac?
I would like it, but it would have to be done well. I'd almost have to see how they do it, because it's so critical in the show, right? Like how you're actually kind of customizing your Gundam. It kind of makes or breaks no matter what Gundam you're actually using.
Yeah.
What mobile suit you're using, there's so many tweaks you could do to it that make all the difference in the middle of a battle. So I wonder if they even had like something where you could put like cotton inside of it, like that one character did with her Akbar.
Oh yeah.
So it, like makes it instantly repel like physical attacks.
But it's very prone to
That'd be
like
pretty
fire
cool.
attacks. It'll catch on fire.
Yeah, is that what happened? No, that
I
didn't
don't
happen in
I
the
don't
show.
remember.
But yeah, so I don't know. I like that idea. It gets very meta in a way. Kind of reminds me of this one game I did some research on. It's a versus game too, but this one specifically stuck out to me. Mobile Suit Gundam, Gundam versus Gundam. This was 2008, arcade and PSP. What was special about this one, Brian, was that it takes place in our world, but in the future. So let me explain. It takes place in 2030. All right. And it includes all Gundam series pretty much and their spin-offs. What happens in the actual setting of the game though is the Devil Gundam comes to like our world in 2030 and he invades like video game systems and
Oh
he
wow.
combines all of them into one. So the heroes of all the different Gundam series have to team up to fight the Devil Gundam and save the world or whatever.
Yeah.
So I thought
Nice.
that was yeah, I thought that was maybe the most obvious and kind of a genius way of explaining why all the heroes would be in character working together against a common enemy. I mean, I'm kind of for it though, because I don't know, it sounded fun. I'm not too big on most of the Gundam versus Gundam descriptions I read, but this sounded like a cool idea, I thought.
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous enough to be great as a video game.
I can't think of like the equivalent. Like, I don't know if like you heard about this movie coming out where like the devil like needed to be stalked by like every superhero in DC and Marvel and like X-Men, like and Jesus or something. Like people would go see it because it's just so out there. I think
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a spectacle, right? And
it'd
I
be
think
like
that's a
this is a
big,
big showdown. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that's a big draw for Gundam, right? I mean, if you'll argue with your friends about what suit's better than another suit, and so what better way to get people to buy the game than to put them all in one game? And I think that's why a lot of people like the Extreme Versus series, because they've got 183 of them to choose from, and they're all from different shows. So yeah, if you do the
yeah,
same thing, but you put
exactly.
them all in a story together, that's definitely going to be pretty popular.
Speaking of great video games, well, it's a matter of opinion. The Dynasty Warrior Gundam games are on my list, Brian. Did they make it to your list?
No, they did not.
Okay. I don't blame you for not putting them on because, sorry, listeners, if you're a big fan, I'm not that big of a fan of the Dynasty Warrior Gundam games. Every Dynasty Warrior game I've played always came off as a little repetitive to the point of being boring, right? It's the same pretty static, low AI enemies that you fight in the same static maps, and it's just hack and slash over and over again, just repetitive moves. I never found it too interesting, but I mean they pumped out these Dynasty Warrior Gundam games, right? They had them on PS2, PS3, Xbox. It was like a fungus spreading. Right?
Yeah, I haven't played too many Dynasty Warrior games. I've played the first Hyrule Warriors, which was made by the Dynasty Warriors team, but it's a Zelda game. I did kind of lose interest in that pretty quickly based on for the same reason that you just said. It was very repetitive. So yeah, I'm not sure those games are my favorite either. But I know there are a lot of people who really love the Dynasty Warrior games, and I think
Yeah.
people just love those games because it's you get to do a bunch of big attacks and kill a lot of enemies all the time, right? There's no break in the action. You kind of just, oh, here comes another horde, and then you just with kind of the same 3-4 hit combo.
Yeah, the
Uh,
scale though always gets thrown off. Kind of, I felt though, because like would 100 Zaku's really charge one Gundam? Or
that's
vice
true.
versa. 20 Doms leading like 100 Zaku's on like in a city square.
Yeah. Had they done that in the real show, they may have won. They may have actually destroyed the Gundam if 100 Zaku's attacked him at once.
Probably. I mean, at a certain point, Amuro has trouble with like more than 4 enemies at once. So
Yeah, he's only got so much ammo. So
yeah, exactly. He can only point his gun in one direction. What's another game on your list, Brian?
I got one on here that I think you would really enjoy, and that one is called Mobile Suit Gundam Zeonic Front. This came out,
Oh, this is on my
yeah,
list.
yep, came out in 2001 for the PS2. And it's a third-person action game, but it's slower paced, so it's more of a strategy game. and I would say it's much more of a
Mm-hmm.
simulation than like the Versus series. This is another one that has a really cool sort of side story. So you play as Lieutenant Garrett Schmitzer and his newly formed Zeon Commando unit by Cecilia Zabi called the Midnight Fenrir, which that's a great
Mm-hmm.
name, first of all. So I'm in just
Yeah.
based on that. And you play as part of this group, and you go through various famous one-year war battles, Battle of Seattle, Battle of Jabberwow. And then you end up in Australia, but you're stranded on Earth after you fight to get the last Zeon remnants off of Earth. And I believe the fate of the Midnight Fenrir Corps is never revealed, which is pretty neat. So maybe purposely
Huh.
left that thread open. But the whole time you're being pursued by a Federation pilot named Agar, and he pilots the Gundam Mudrock, which I believe is Unit 6. And I think
Oh,
it's also
wow.
your favorite RX-78 version.
Not anymore. Kidding. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I remember hearing about this game when it came out, just from like, other people that had it. I never played it, but I always thought it was so cool. They're actually playing a Xeon.
I believe
Yeah.
it's the first one where you exclusively played as Zeon, at least for PlayStation, if I remember that right. And I did watch some video of this game being played. While it is third-person action, it is very much slower than, say, something like the Versus series, where the
All right.
Versus series you're kind of flying all over the place, going super fast, blah blah blah. But this one takes place on Earth, and you know what? If you want your Zaku to walk to the other side of the mountain, your ass has to walk to the other side of that mountain, and it's gonna take you a long time because your little Zaku is gonna go tung 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 tung, and he's gonna have to walk all the way over there, and you're gonna get attacked by like a helicopter or something else, and so and you have to aim really carefully. It's definitely more of a simulation and strategy based. You have to call your allies, tell them where to go on the map, that kind of thing. So that's why I think this would be right up your alley.
Yeah. After this podcast, I think I'm gonna watch like a playthrough and just like check it out.
Yeah, and
It's
again,
yeah.
2001, so the graphics probably they're not up to par for today's standards, but gameplay wise, sounds pretty fun. I think a lot of people really enjoyed it. Plus, it sounds like it has a pretty neat story, and the Gundam Mudrock is a super cool design. So yeah, I don't know. I think that one's worth checking out. I would play through that one.
You had me at Xeon.
Had him. Here's one you probably have no interest in: Mobile Gundam Encounters in Space. So this came out in 2003 for the PS2. It's similar third-person action shooter. I think this one is less strategy-based than Zeonic Front, probably more like Rise from the Ashes, except third-person instead of first-person. This one apparently is people really love this game, not because it's the greatest game, but apparently it's one of the few games that sort of nails space combat. We talked a little bit about this in the theme park episode of trying to design that game, which turns out Bonds of the Battlefield kind of already is. But space combat just seems like it's much harder,
Right.
to do because you have the up and down as well as the left and the right. You're not on land, right?
Yeah.
So this whole game takes place in space. Everything is a space combat battle, and it's based on UC. I think it has a very small section that's an original story, but for the most part, you play as known characters during famous battles throughout the 1 year war. But I think if I'm remembering right, I think this is the game that has some really cool cutscenes with like newer animation of maybe some older stuff. Like I'm pretty sure they reanimated the final shot of the Gundam from Mobile Suit Gundam.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool seeing that because Gundam, the original series has really old animation, as we've talked about many times. So getting to see that reanimated. Now, granted, this game came out in 2003, so now the newer version is still 17 years old as of this recording, but it still looks way better than the 1979 version. Even if you're not going to play the game, I would recommend trying to find the clip from Encounters in Space of the final shot.
Damn, that sounds pretty cool, actually. I mean, God, how interesting they put in the effort to reanimate part of a series. I guess maybe just the critical parts, or parts that they thought fit the storyline of the game, but they still haven't moved their feet to actually redo the whole series.
Yeah, I know.
Have you ever heard of the anime Legend of the Galactic Heroes?
I have. Yep. I've never watched it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
They remade it, or they're at least in the process of, remaking it in segments. So I figured that's such an epic long series. Why not just do the same for Gundam? But I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure it's being planned in some conference room slowly but sure.
We'll get there one day. Yeah, I did actually see something about that. I forget where I read this. I think it might have been a post on Reddit or something else. But I think I was just watching YouTube videos one day, and I came across the trailer for Origin. And the trailer wasn't actually really a trailer for Origin at all. It was really just they reanimated about it was less than a minute of the Gundam stepping off the platform for the first time and firing its Vulcans at the Zaku from episode 1 in the Origin style. And as you know, I mean, at the very end of Origin, we see the white base fly off in the new animation. And I forget whether it was an article somewhere or someone on Reddit was saying that, clearly they intend to do the whole series that way. Otherwise, they would not have made assets for the Gundam and for the white base. Who knows what else they've already made in that sort of style. And then I also read someone was saying that they want to do it, but they can't get it's going to take a really long time, and no animation studio wants to sign up to do it for that long or dedicate that much resources, and it's basically a scheduling issue. I don't know if that's true. Could be. We're getting a little bit off topic now, but we're as we've talked about before, remaking this is basically franchise planning, right? Like, you want Gundam to survive another 40 years. So if you're going to redo the main series, you want to redo it the best you can so that it lasts the longest possible time, right? You want that thing in 4K, widescreen, best everything, right?
Right.
So yeah, maybe they're just taking their time. I don't know. But there is I think it's just called, Gundam Rising or something. So yeah, highly recommend you go watch it. It's 30 seconds max. It's the Gundam getting up, but in the Origin style, firing its Vulcans. Looks pretty damn cool.
Speaking of pretty cool, and speaking of recent animation, one of the games on my list is Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn. Did this make it to your list, Brian?
It did not, although I assume Unicorn had at least a few games.
Yeah. Ironically, well, not ironically, but interestingly, this game, I put it for two interesting reasons, actually. This game is only based on the first 3 episodes. So I figured, this must have been something that they probably just machined out as quick as they could. Maybe they fell behind schedule or something like that. And I don't know, timing was an issue. So they said, okay, there's only 3 episodes out. Get this game out and make it on those 3 episodes.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Pump it out. Because, I mean, the release timing, it was, at least a year-ish between every episode, almost half a year. Yeah. So I could see that for sure. Yeah.
What's interesting, too, about this one is there's 3 arcs you can play as, and 2 of them are Neo Zeon. 2 of them. Wow. One of them's Merida, who, if you remember, is the pilot, also known as the Quad Wing. Mm-hmm. You can play as Full Frontal. Interesting. Get to be in the Sinanju. And, of course, Banager, who pilots the Unicorn. So I thought that was interesting. I wondered what made them want to make it a villain-focused in a way. Well, yeah. Actually, okay, I figured they'd probably, watch the first 3 episodes and okay, who are the 3 coolest people as pilots? 2 of them are Zeon. Who cares? Just make the game. What's next on your list, Brian?
The final one on my list is the G Generation games. So there's a series of games called SD Gundam G Generation, and then they have a bunch of subtitles. So these are more like strategy RPGs, so closer to Final Fantasy Tactics, if anyone's ever played those. And there's a lot of fans out there for the G Generation games. And these games use SD Gundam sprites, and they, there's a ton of games. I think I counted 20 G Generation games at least in total. And they cross, all timelines, tons of suits. So if you're looking for variety and you want an RPG, then the G Generation games, I think, is where you want to spend your time.
Interesting. SD doesn't get a lot of love, but you know what? Might as well make a game, right?
Yeah, well, and actually, so there were 20 G Generation games, but there's more than that have SD Gundam in it. There are 57 total SD Gundam games. Uh-huh. So out of our 199, 57 are SD Gundam related. 20 of those 57 are the G generation games. So SD Gundam gets a lot of play. Now, some of these are probably pretty old. I see a lot of Super Nintendo. There's one even on Virtual Boy. Check that out. Game Boy Advance. A lot of them are on the NES and the Wonder Swan. So there's definitely a lot of old ones here. Game Boy, Game Gear. But that doesn't change the fact. I mean, they made those games, so.
It's not that I don't like SD Gundam, but like I'd have to like want to play the right kind of game for SD Gundam, like almost something that's kind of doesn't take itself too seriously, like maybe a Smash Brothers type SD Gundam game or something. That sounds like it'd be fun, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. Cool. I think it's also just a time thing, right? If you have a limited amount of time and you have to choose between all these different Gundam games, which one are you going to choose? If I was 13 and had a lot of time, sign me up for SD Gundam.
Exactly.
As in my 30s with no time, I'm probably going to spend it on Bonds of the Battlefield if I get the chance.
Yeah, there goes all your money.
Hey, if I get to put me in a Zaku, it's worth it.
I'm surprised you'd pick the Zaku. You'd be in the gym sniper, like shooting from across the map, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Whatever's available.
Yeah.
What if you go though to Japan, Isaac, and and you get into the arcade, you walk in, right? And you find the Bonds of the Battlefield section. There's only one pod open, and you have to play as the Gundam. Like you can't play as the Zaku. How heartbroken will you be?
I would take it on the chin just to get in like the cockpit and go through the motions. I'd have to visualize in my mind that I'm a Zeon pilot and this is a simulation. We're doing combat data to try to like understand the mindset of Gundam pilots so we can defeat them. There you go, problem solved. That's how we do things on the Great Daegwin, my flagship.
The King Space Pig.
There you go.
And the last one I had on my list was probably the one that you started out with. So what is that? What is the gaping hole that we haven't talked about?
The gaping, open, heaving hole is Giren's Greed, Brian. Mm-hmm. Giren's Greed. I believe it's also called Giren no Yabu. Also sometimes called Giren's Ambition, interestingly. This is like the Gundam chess, the Gundam Risk. It's essentially a grand strategy game, sometimes called 4X games, right? Explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. So in addition to actually doing battles and stuff, you actually have to do things like research and development, things like mine resources and increase your production capacity so you can actually manufacture more ships and manufacture more mobile suits and things like that. So lots of pieces and pieces of information to keep track of and things to do as you try to liberate the Earth sphere or conquer it. It's such a sprawling series. It's evolved over time. The first one was just the 1 year war, but as it goes on and there's been different versions made, there's been some interesting options you can take. There's sort of like scenarios where you can have different things happen in different timelines. You can have like the Titans get created, different like versions of Neo Zeon get created. Like there's a version called Zeon Reborn, led by Garma. There's a version led by Kycelia called Legitimate Zeon.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, something really cool I read was, of all the people, Brian, guess who can potentially make their own faction?
And this is like outside of the usual suspects?
Completely. Like, not even a left field. Out of the park.
Out of the park. Kai?
No. Temray.
Temray?
Temray can create something called the Temray Army.
Wow.
And let me just jump ahead a little bit. Okay, if you win the game as Temray's army, here's their ending, all right? He takes over the Earth sphere, and like his faction is pretty much just a group of scientists, right? Yeah. That's what their thing is. So they're running the Earth sphere, and Temray creates an artificial intelligence to run the world.
Oh, wow.
And the AI pretty much forces him into retirement. The AI pretty much tells the public that like, okay, he's gonna go work on the next Gundam or something like that, and they just never hear from Temre again, kind of implying that I think the AI either killed him or just he's been abandoned in some cabin somewhere or something. Where the
Wow,
AI,
that's like a
yeah,
real hard sci-fi turn.
yeah, like Skynet wins. But
Jeez.
yeah, so and it also says that people aren't being happy, ruled by a machine, but there's nothing they can do.
Oh, jeez.
So yeah, it's a an oppressive but peaceful future under Temre's rule. But
So
but
in
yeah,
these Garen's Greed games, do you choose who you play as, or are you sort of just like the player affecting the world as a whole and like all the pawns in it?
no. You're not even like the leader of each side. You're above that. You're just controlling each individual like pilot and the overall strokes of like what happens in the game. There's almost like two different modes, right? There's like the main sort of overview mode where you're just kind of managing and running your government. The game takes place over like 150 turns.
Oh,
So
okay.
in your turn, you need to like start moving around your fleets, decide how many with each fleet. What are you researching? How much resources do you have to manufacture new weapons and things like that? What's interesting about it too is like you don't necessarily have to make, if you're the Federation, you can keep making those double barrel tanks if you wanted. You'll probably perform poorly in battle against like even Zaku's, but it's your prerogative.
Right. Right.
Yeah, like if you read some of the things players write online, because there is an attempt by like a lot of English players to play it, even if they don't know Japanese so much. A lot of players have been able to sort of figure out what certain combinations of like Japanese writing kanji means, like start and I guess
Yeah,
like
of
a
course.
deployed troops or something like that. So you can kind of stumble your way through it, I guess, with the online community, but it gets pretty like complex as far as oh, this, what do I do? I need advice, guys. I have too many Musais. I should have built more Zanzibars so I can actually leave Earth and like move more troops around and stuff like that.
Right.
So it's very intense. Yeah,
It's very much it's very much like the Civilization games kind of.
pretty much. Yeah, I'd say it's that level of strategy. So I wouldn't say it's a casual game really. It sounds much more like something you'd play over days, weeks, maybe, as you try to free the Earth sphere from Zeon rule or use Zeonic forces to conquer it.
And there's a lot of these games, right? Like what kind of systems are they on?
Some of them were on PC, a lot of them were on the PlayStations. So it's been very Japanese centric, I would say.
And are they not? I assume they've not been officially translated. I wonder if there's any fan translation projects out there.
Possibly, but the last time I checked, it seems like if you're an English speaker, an English reader, and you want to play the game, you just really have to stumble through it. You'll maybe write things down in like a notebook or something like that, and you can just flip through it and try to match. And then it's like, oh, okay, this screen's for picking what pilots I want to go with the fleet. Things like that.
That's tough.
Yeah, but it sounds like an awesome game. I'd love to play. Having seen some videos of it, I wasn't too thrilled with how the actual battle map looks. It almost looks more like less of a chessboard and more like I don't know, a board game.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like there's squares they have to move in certain areas, and then they lead over here to this part of the battle, and there's like a fork in the road and all that. It kind of made me scratch in my head, like, why is this happening in like a Baoku? Like, shouldn't we just be able to kind of move in any direction? But I digress. I'm sure there was a logic behind it, but
maybe they put all their effort into the story on this one.
Maybe, yeah, pretty much, because depending on what game you're playing, the story can like shoot off into different areas. Really, how you're starting out as might have an impact on what units you can build and things you can do, what pilots you have access to. If you start off and you choose the Titans in one of the games, you're not going to be able to necessarily pick like Amuro Ray. That wouldn't fit. But and who knows what crazy things have to happen in Zeon for them to start splintering up into like Zeon Reborn and legitimate Zeon and all that. Good Lord.
Legitimate Zeon. Was she just like, I have to make them know that we are the one, and it has to be in the name?
Yeah, at that point, like Dagon makes his own called like Real Zeon. Giran makes first Zeon.
Yeah.
And then maybe Mrs. Zombie comes out of retirement and she creates like organic Zeon or something. Natural Zeon. But I mean, this game would be so cool for us to play, Brian, because like if it would be turn based, we could essentially make our moves, right? And then end our turns, and then the game would like sync, and then we would just do this for days, if not weeks, right?
Right.
As convenient for
Bandai.
us.
Yeah, Bandai. Where is my mobile translated version of Giran's
Yeah.
Greed? Why can I not play it remotely? That seems just get. I'll keep the crappy graphics. Just translate it. Put it over here.
Yeah. But what can we do? Man,
I don't know.
what had to happen in the timeline for Temrays to win? You know?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I thought you were gonna say his faction was called the Terrible Fathers Association.
Like the neglectful child.
Yeah, failed fathers.
Yeah. Remember in Origin, he came home and was like, Amuro, if you're gonna have a girl over, you should at least like clean up and wear pants.
Oh, what a failure!
Oh,
The
Mr.
clueless failure.
Yeah, he spent way too much time in the lab.
Yeah.
God, how horrible was Zeon on the battlefield that Temray would win, and how bad was like the Federation that they let Temray just build an army?
Did he must have usurped control of Anaheim, or how did he have the resources to take over?
I'm gonna say something like that happened, or I have to assume his faction has almost no pilots or weak pilots, or maybe their suits are just run by program, and they have no officers. It's just the scientists making machines that essentially fight on their own, probably just with general direction from the scientists.
Yeah.
Temray,
huh? What a kook.
It's kind of interesting though. I imagine they start on the moon, and then from there they just like, okay, we're going to start running the show. We don't need the Federation. We'll defeat them, and we'll defeat Zeon.
New plan. The third faction.
Yeah. No one's going to see us coming, guys. You got to trust
never
me.
Know.
Yeah. Shouldn't you check on your son, sir? Who?
Who's
Isn't his name Amuro? Isn't he a pilot in the war?
Yeah. What happens to Amuro in that? What happens to Amuro in that scenario? Do you know?
No. I guess Temray doesn't care either.
I mean, presumably, if he was going to take over, he would have to defeat the Gundam.
Maybe, or in this timeline. Oh, you know what? Amuro is, to an extent, he's kind of spineless, right, in the first series. So I can see Amuro kind of be like, I guess I'll do what you say, Dad. Son, I'm going to need you to come back to the moon and lead my army.
Oh yeah, what if it's like that was the original. I think I read an interview with George Lucas or something where he was talking to either Mark Hamill or someone. Maybe it was Lawrence Kasdan, the guy who wrote Empire Strikes Back, and he was saying that at the end of Return of the Jedi, they had this conversation of George Lucas said, what I really want Luke to say right now when he holds out his hand to Darth Vader at the end after they've thrown the Emperor overboard. Oh, wow. He was like, what would be the best ending to this would be to have Luke say something like, "Now, Father, we can take over the galaxy together." But then, obviously the series wasn't headed in that direction. So
can you imagine?
That clearly would have went a different way. But, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of alternate Star Wars stuff that would go into that. But that's kind of what this is to me, right? Where you could have that father-son dynamic, or maybe you're right. Maybe Amuro fights on Temray's side, and that's how he takes over.
Maybe that'd be kind of cool, though. God, maybe George Lucas has the only copy of them filming that scene or something.
Yeah, I don't even know if they even filmed the scene. I think it was just a conversation between him and either Mark Hamill or whatever. But yeah, I mean, at that point, I don't think Star Wars was on a certain trajectory. I'm sure I mean, that would have completely changed the whole dynamic of the series. But
you know what? I mean, these factions all sound so interesting. If I ever play the game, I'd want to do the timelines and actions that get to these factions. Just to see what happens. Yeah, just It'd be so interesting, such like a alternate history kind of thing that it'd be like, all right, let's see what this is all about. And there's a lot to do because the story goes through not only the original series but Zeta, Double Zeta, Shard's counterattack, and they even get to Hathaway's Flash.
Oh wow, that's a lot to cover.
Yeah, and even this manga series called Advance of Z, Flag of Titans. So yeah, there's Titan stuff going on in some of the later Gihren's Greeds. So.
There you go. Yeah, I think so. If you're a fan who really loves the what if scenarios, Gihren's Greed is where you want to live. Go fumble through the Japanese if you can't read it.
You know what's kind of sinister? At the end of Temrei's ending, there's no name for the AI. Like,
oh wow,
that adds like, okay, every AI that's bad in like a sci-fi series or whatever, right, or a movie, they always give it some name, right? Skynet or I don't know, Mother Brain or whatever. It's always some looming threat that gets a name, right?
Yeah.
It's so. The more I think about it, it's kind of horrifying that this government AI never gives itself a name or never tells people to give itself a name. It's just, the government now.
Yeah, that is pretty terrifying, actually. It seems more real that way.
Right. Like, imagine getting a knock on your door and, like, I don't know, it's like robot goons and like, wait, who are you? Who are you with? Just nothing. You just know it's the government.
We have no name.
Yeah. You know it's the authority, the government.
We don't need a name.
Yeah. We don't even need to talk. You know why we're here.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, I mean, we covered quite a lot then. I mean, after hearing all this, I really want to play Bonds of the Battlefield.
Yeah.
And Gihren's Greed.
Those are the top of my list. And you know what? Now that we're done with this sort of, run through of lots of different Gundam games, say what you will about them not being able to get a high score, but there's a lot of variety.
Yeah, they're making a game for every gamer out there, right? We've covered RPGs, we covered fighting games, we covered action games, and then with Gihren's Greed, you have this. What did you call it? A 4X game? I've never even heard that term before, but that's pretty neat. So, and then Bonds of the Battlefield, you've got your simulators. So they've got it all covered.
Except for one thing, though, Brian. Right? What's the one thing they don't have covered? What's the one game?
You'll notice, listeners, that they don't have a racing game, and we gave them all the material they need a few weeks ago in the Gundam Mario Kart episode. So, Bandai, you've got a gaping hole in your video game resume right now for the Gundam franchise. Go get it done. You know where to reach us at Colony Dropcast on Twitter. We're here. We will consult.
I can't believe you said gaping hole again. Comment below how many times in the podcast we said gaping hole. Like you got punched by a Zaku in your torso. Just a gaping hole made by a heat rod or something.
I guess the games that I would gravitate towards beyond Bonds of the Battlefield and Gihren's Greed are the ones that have like the original side stories. Because I like learning about new Gundam stories that I don't already know about. So that's things like Rise from the Ashes, Zeonic Front. So I would definitely be down to play like those kind of games if I could kind of get a hold of them and have the extra time. So for those people that feel the same way, I noticed I don't see a lot of new games coming out like that. Like I don't see a lot of new original UC side story games coming out. I mean, it seems like we're getting a lot of these sort of gunpla games and like the fighting games, like the Extreme Versus series. I don't feel like we're getting a lot of new Rise from the Ashes, unless you found some, Isaac. But
no.
It seems like that style has kind of fallen off a bit, and maybe that's just because those games are more risky. But there is a game that came out for the PS3, I think a few years ago, called Gundam Side Stories, and it collects 8 of those side story games. So if you're interested in those, that to me is like a prime way to consume them if it's got 8 in one package that you could go buy. So that seems pretty good. I might try to track that one down, even though I don't own a PS3.
I mean, at this point, they're kind of cheap. So
yeah, I think my brother owns one. Maybe I'll go borrow it.
There you go. He'll come through.
I would also be, I think in general, I think we would want to hear from you listeners what your favorite Gundam game is and kind of why. And then if there's any of you out there who maybe you lived in Japan during the 80s and you played some of these games from the 80s in the home computer era, or even some of the games from like the early 90s that were on Super Nintendo or Game Boy, that we didn't really talk about here just because we don't know that much about them. I'd love to hear your opinion on those to see, because for example, a lot of people in the sort of modern console world of Nintendo, Sony, Sega, all the early 2000s games are remembered quite fondly, and I'm wondering if those who grew up in the 80s and 90s, playing those Japanese only Gundam games, I wonder if you feel the same way about those games, or maybe they were just all terrible and that's why no one talks about them as much. But I'd just be curious if anyone else, I mean, probably a long shot, but it would be curious if anyone has some thoughts on those.
Man, there's just a world of Gundam games waiting to be explored, but Bonds of the Battlefield.
that trumps them all.
That is my first stop on my arrival in Japan. Like,
excuse me, yes.
I'll look.
And are you gonna ask the customs guy, which way to the nearest Bonds of the Battlefield console or pod, whatever?
I'll be in my finest first class Zeon Admiral uniform.
Excuse me, you clearly know where I'm going. Could you just kindly point me in the right direction? They'd probably do it because the Japanese people are so nice.
Probably. Like, I'm sure you know of my grandfather, Admiral DeLon.
I'm sure you've heard of him.
He died bravely in combat.
He was kind of a big deal around these parts.
Yeah. Maybe you heard of Operation Stardust.
Well,
they need me in my dom.
You're a lone dom troppin'.
It's the extra husky one. Yeah.
So, listeners, I hope you enjoyed our kind of overview / discussion about Gundam video games. I hope maybe we, turned you on to one you hadn't heard about. Like I said, I think we'd be interested to hear about what your favorite Gundam video game is, or which one, or maybe you have one where you just really hated it and you want to let us know which ones were terrible. So yeah, leave us a comment. You can leave us comments on YouTube or on Twitter at Colony Dropcast, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Have a good night. Keep on gaming those Gundam games.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Oh, God.